All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei. To thank Dr. Linda Weinberg, Sarah, and Ricky Gratz, Julia, Rena, and Eve for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in loving memory of husband, father, Zayda, Dr. Paul Weinberg, parents, Moshe Ben Avraham, David. To thank Ayal and Sara Steinberg for dedicating the shiurim this month in the zechus of Refuah Sheleima for shulamis bas susha. To thank Adam Yudit Ben Zev for dedicating the shiurim this month in the zechus of all of our tefillos being miskabel on high. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Saeed and Sima Haken for Refuah Sheleima for their granddaughter, Talia, Miriam, Bas Orli, Yehudit. To thank Greg and Rachel Levitan for dedicating the shiurim this week, commemoration of the first yahrzeit of Greg's mother, Esther Levitan, and in gratitude to Renewal, an organization that helps save lives by facilitating kidney transplants through live kidney donations through those suffering through chronic kidney disease. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Menashe Bracha Efron, in honor of the birth of BatSheva Tzirel Edinger, and in honor of her parents. And Meretz Hashem, as she continued to grow to be a true Bas Yisrael and Akaras Habayis, Admeh Ve'esim Shanim Tovos. With that, let us begin a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Peites 89, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on the bottom of Peiches and Beis, the last line. We left off yesterday at the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says as follows: Hotzia get ve'enimo Kesuvos. We're continuing on in the sugya that has been the topic of the last couple of Mishnayos, namely again different circumstances where halacha l'maisa, a woman does not have a classic path forward with collection of her ksuva. So in this particular case, here's what's happening. Hotzia get, she produces a get. So right, Reuven is married to Rachel. Now what happens? Rachel produces a get that Reuven divorced her, ve'enima ksuva. But she does not have a ksuva. She literally does not have a ksuva document. So what's the halacha? Now Rashi says over here, Hotzia get ve'enima ksuva, kasaka zaitcha ba'omeres avad shtar ksuvasi. So Rashi's Bapasha cases where she said, I had a ksuva, but I lost it. Okay, so what's the halacha? Top of Peites, govek suvasa. Even in the absence, ultimately, of an actual ksuva document, she can still collect her ksuva. What's that? Well, again, we'll explain this more in the Gemara, but take a quick look at Rashi. Govek suvasa, ve'eno yochol liton paraticha, ve'chzarta lishtar ksuvasayich, v'karativ. So here's what's interesting. You see, you might be tempted to say as follows. The husband, Reuven, has a good claim over here. What's his claim? Yeah, Rachel, you know why you don't have a ksuva? You know why you don't have a ksuva? Because ultimately I paid you already. And remember again, the ksuva is effectively what? Is the loan document. So what happens with a loan document after you go ahead and repay it? It's torn up. So Reuven can say to Rachel, there's a good reason you don't have a ksuva, because I paid you your ksuva already. You gave me the document, we tore it up. So we're going to see, the Gemara is explaining, when Mishnah is explaining, that halacha l'maisa, the husband, Reuven, cannot make such a claim. Why? Rashi says, Mishum ditnai ksuva maisa bezdinhu. Or mehachanafkalon, supposed to say the idea over here, well, let's read the finish Rashi. Mehachanafkalon, v'va mitzia toin achar maisa bezdin lo amar klum. My taima, kol maisa bezdin kiman dinakit shtar dami. Now, so we've actually seen this concept before. That halacha l'maisa, a ksuva is what's called a t'nai bezdin, which means a ksuva is a legal reality created by bezdin. That legal reality applies whether there's a shtar or there's not a shtar. In fact, we're going to see, we've already learned that there were communities where they didn't write a ksuva. They never wrote a ksuva document. Despite the absence of a document, the ksuva obligation was always intact. It's what Chazal legislated. So because of that, failure to produce an actual document in no way erodes her claim to actually collect the ksuva. Now, of course, she needs a get. We're going to get into this. In other words, you need some proof of divorce that you're entitled to a ksuva. In other words, either what do you need? Either you need a get or levaya, right? You need one of the two. In other words, you need something to indicate that you have a claim. But l'maisa, once you have a claim, absence of the actual ksuva document does not in any way undermine or erode her ability to collect. Good. That's case one. Case two. This is interesting. Ksuva ve'enima get. This is interesting. What happens if she produces a ksuva, but she can't produce a get? So, all right. So what happened? He omeres avad giti. So she says, I lost my get. So what happened? I lost my get. And what happens? V'hu omer avad shovri. Oh, now here was interesting. He says, okay, that's fine. In other words, he's not contesting the fact that they got divorced. What he's claiming is, I paid you the ksuva already, and in fact, I had a receipt. I had a receipt that indicated that I paid you. I lost my receipt. So you see what's happening over here? She's claiming, right? She's producing a ksuva. She's claiming I lost my get. He's claiming I lost my receipt. So both saying now the Gemara gives a similar case. V'chein bal chov shahotzi shtar chov ve'eni mo pruzbal. Very shayach, right? What happens? Reuven lends Shimon money. Now Reuven produces a loan document, and what happens? It's now 8th year. Right, this year. So he produces the loan document, but he's not able to produce his pruzbal. So again, we'll discuss pruzbal in just a moment. So we'll say, remember again, pruzbal is the document which allows you to collect a post-Shemitah debt. Take a quick look, Rabbi say, if you look at Rashi, it's actually Rashi, it's the last Rashi in the Mishnah. Pruzbal, so we're going to go out of order. Rashi says, Hillel Hiskin Pruzbal. Hillel was the one who instituted a pruzbal. Why? In order that Shemitah should not go ahead and cancel out a debt. Now, how does pruzbal work? Shemoser shtarosav lebezdin sheyikvu min halo ve'chove chovo kol zman sheyit be'enu. I will say, now remember again, how does pruzbal work? Pruzbal effectively takes a private debt, hands it over to Bezdin, and Bezdin now becomes the collection arm for the debt. Now, why does that circumvent Shemitah law? So listen to this. So Rashi continues. He says, "Dahashta lo karinan be lo yigos she'ino tovo klum ela habezdin tovo she'efkerem hayahefker ve'im yardel nechasav." So also, without getting into all technicalities right now, essentially Shemitah cancels out private debts. Shemitah does not cancel out debts which are ultimately held by Beis Din. So I will say, so in this case over here, the Mishnah is equating these two cases. So right, she's producing a ksuva, but doesn't have the ability to produce a get. Right? He's claiming, I paid you already, but I can't produce my shover. That's what, so right, he's saying, I paid you, but I don't have my receipt. Parallel case is Reuven lends Shimon money. Reuven produces a loan document, says, you know what, I lost my pruzbal. What's talach in these cases? So the Gemara says, Hare elu lo yifru. In these cases, ultimately, again, so you cannot collect in these cases. What do you mean you cannot collect? Look at Rashi. Hare elu lo yifru. Chayshinan shema kvar govsa beget. V'zeh hishmitaso shvius. Shabbos say we are concerned, ultimately, again, in this case, that perhaps the woman already collected her ksuva. Maybe she already collected her ksuva. In other words, the reason she doesn't have a get. Let's analyze this. What are we concerned about? Why doesn't Rachel have a get? Because it could be that in this case, the get was kind of used as the mechanism for payment of the ksuva. Give me the get, I'll give you the ksuva. So that's the possibility of the concern over here. So Rashi says, right, so Chashin and Shema Kvar Govsa beget. And ultimately, failure to produce a pruzbal, ultimately what? Really precludes your ability to collect that debt afterwards. So in this case over here, husband won't have to pay the ksuva, and ultimately, again, debtor will not have to go ahead and pay. Debtor won't have to pay the debt. Okay, again, we'll analyze this case a little bit more. So what comes along Shimon Gamliel and says something amazing. Minas sakana ve'elech. From the time of danger and on, so isha govek suvasa shelo beget. A woman has the ability. So remember again. Here's what's interesting. In case number one, right? What's happening? In case number one, what is she producing? She's producing a get and no ksuva. What's taloch in that case? She could collect. Now, why could she collect her ksuva? Why? Because the truth is, you don't even need a document of a ksuva for a ksuva to be intact. Because a ksuva is a Tanai Bezdin. In case number two, she's producing a ksuva with no get. So the Gemara says that's like producing a loan document in year number 8 without a pruzbal. What do we have to be concerned about in that case? We're concerned if you can't produce a get. What are we concerned about? That why can't you produce a get? Because effectively the husband took the get as the receipt. That's essentially what it is. In other words, he took the get as the receipt, paid her the ksuva, so that's the concern. Comes from Shimon and says everything changed. Minas sakana. So we'll say, what's minas sakana? Look at Rashi. Shegazru ovdei kochavim al ha-mitzvos v'hayu yireim lishmar giteyem u'mishikiblaso sarfaso v'chein pruzbulehen. So we'll say, listen to this. Shimon says, from the time of sakana and on. What point of sakana? Take your pick. What time of sakana? In other words, there are so many times in Jewish history where this was the reality. Shimon says, in a time of sakana, where there was a danger in keeping Jewish documents. So remember again, there was legislation against observing halacha. So here was the problem, is if you kept Jewish documents in your possession, again, that was a crime. So it's incredible. So what would people do? A woman would receive a get. And what would she do after she would receive the get? What would she do? She would destroy it. Because you don't want to have any evidence, which of course is a dangerous thing in general. We'll talk about this in the Gemara. Same thing with pruzbul. You write a pruzbul, and what would happen? You destroy it. I just want to point out, technically speaking, does a woman have to hold on to her get after she's divorced? Do you have to hold on to your pruzbul? You don't have to. In other words, you want to. We're going to see, because a woman wants to be able to get remarried. And generally, again, if a woman is divorced, no one in good faith is going to allow her to get remarried until they're able to see her get. Same thing with the pruzbul. But again, technically speaking, your status is established the moment you go ahead and you receive. So they used to destroy these documents. So the Rabbi Shimon says, from sakana and on, isha gova ksuva, so shalo beget. A woman could go ahead and collect her ksuva even without a get. So Rabbi Shimon says, case number 2 in the Mishnah, which was where she's showing up. So, Sima say, Bepashtos, it would be interesting if she's showing up with a ksuva without a get. Right? In other words, ksuva is also a problem. So, okay, maybe she was holding on to something. We'll clarify in the Gemara a little bit. The point the Gemara is making, the point of Shimon is saying over here is, in the first stage of the Mishnah, failure to produce a get looks like she was already paid for a ksuva. Right, and again, if she wants to go ahead, if she wants to claim that she wasn't paid for the ksuva, then again it's going to be a case of hamotzi mechavero alav haraya. Rabbi Shimon says all of that changes after Shas HaSakana, where it was common for people to destroy documentation. In that case, again, the halacha sides with her. Same idea, we'll say. After the time of Sakana, ultimately, Reuven shows up in year number 8 to collect a debt from Shimon. Shimon claims Shemitah. Shemitah canceled it. Right? Reuven claims, I wrote a pruzbul. Shimon says, okay, show me. Reuven can't produce the pruzbul. We believe Reuven. Okay, fascinating halacha. Says the Gemara, will say, Shema mina, what do you see from here? So ultimately, kosvin shover. The Gemara says, you see from here, by the way, that we write receipts. We've spoken about this concept before, this machlokis halacha. Do we write receipts for payment or not? Look at Rashi just a moment. Shmamina midiktani govek suvasa bautzas get v'lo chayish le'arume me'arma v'hadra umafka ksuva b'beidina achrina v'tigba le'achar misa b'toras almana lomar lo niskarashti v'lo nifresi. So here's what's interesting, right? The Gemara is picking up on case number 1. What was case number 1? Case number 1 was Rachel produces a get, but says she doesn't have her ksuva. So it must be Rabbi says. So now what's the halacha? What's the halacha in that case? Rachel comes to the basin, produces a get, doesn't have. She says, I can't find my ksuva. I lost my ksuva. What's the halacha? We pay her. So we'll say. So now here's what's interesting. So the Gemara says it must be that what are we giving the husband? It must be that we're writing him a receipt, right? We're writing him a receipt. Shmamina kosvin shover, right? Because Rabbi say why? Because let's go back to the Gemara. Let's go back to the Gemara for just a moment. The ain't kosvin shover. If we don't write a receipt for the husband, lechosh dilma mafkila l'ksuvasa v'gavyaba. Ultimately, what should we be concerned about? So Rabbi said, let's play this out. Let's say Rachel's trying to play the system, right? So she's claiming that she doesn't have a ksuva. So what's going to do? She's going to produce her get payment for her ksuva. And then what is she waiting for? She's going to wait for Reuven to die. After Reuven dies, what is she going to do? She's now going to produce a ksuva, right? And she's going to claim that now she's widowed, right? And she's entitled to the ksuva. So ultimately, again, the Gemara says it must be that we're writing a shover, we're writing a receipt for Reuven to show that he paid the ksuva. And again, ultimately when he dies, his heirs will have that receipt as well. Because if we wouldn't write a receipt, it leaves him open to exploitation. Go back to Rashi for just a moment. That's what Rashi was saying. So she's going to produce the ksuva after he dies. Lomar lo niskarashti v'lo nifreisi. Dahavade b'toras krusha lo hadra gavia. Okay, fine. So we'll say, now remember again, the idea of why would there be resistance to writing a receipt? Right? Why is there resistance to writing a receipt? Because if we write the receipt, then the burden of maintaining that receipt falls upon who? Falls upon who? Falls upon the husband. Right? In other words, whoever, because remember again, the husband paid the ksuva, right? The receipt is his proof, ultimately, again, of payment. Remember, the machlokes as to whether or not we write receipts in halacha is dependent on who should shoulder the responsibility in the aftermath of the repayment of the debt. You see, if you don't write the shover, we don't write a shover, there's only one way to get payment, and that's how? Ksuva. Ksuva is the ticket to payment. So if you can produce a ksuva, fantastic, right? Wife produces, or ex-wife produces the ksuva, gives it to her ex-husband, he pays her, what to do with the ksuva? Rip it out. We're done. You see, and then the truth is, no one really has any responsibility for maintaining paperwork. Interestingly enough, the moment you say that all she needs to do is produce a get, and then we're going to go ahead and pay her ksuva, and we don't know where the ksuva is. She says she can't find it. She says it's lost. She may very well have it, in her desk drawer, and she's just waiting for him to die. So now we're going to write a shover, and now the responsibility is upon the husband, and by extension his heirs, to go ahead and maintain that shover. So the Gemara says, but nevertheless, you see that we write a shover, to which the Gemara says, Amarav, Rav says, maybe not. What are we talking about over here? We're talking about a case, ultimately, again, where they don't write a ksuva. Rashi says, so they're in a place where they don't write a ksuva. In other words, we saw this before. There were communities where they didn't feel the need to actually commit the document to writing. So in that case, again, the only way that you could go ahead and show that payment has been made is with a shover. Shmuel says, Shmuel says the truth is this could apply even in a place where they do write a ksuva. The Gemara says, 1 second. So according to Shmuel supports the idea that we write receipts. Amrav Hanan, l'didim mefarshili minei demar Shmuel b'makom she'in kosvin. So we'll say ultimately, here's how we set it up. Rav Hanan says, I heard that according to Shmuel, the way we set it up is like this. We're talking about a place, right, in a locale where they did not normally commit the ksuva to writing, but just relied on the fact that what a ksuva is a Tanai Beis Din. So we'll say, now watch this. Va'amar kasavti. So let's say we'll say Rachel and Shimon, right? Rachel and Reuven are married. And they live in a place where the custom was that people did not write the ksuva. You didn't have to, it's Tanai Beis Din. So what happened? Reuven says, however, I wrote one. I wrote a ksuva. So therefore, again, I want to see the ksuva before I pay you your ksuva. So we'll say, what's the halacha? In that case, alav lahavi raya. In that case, ultimately, again, the burden of proof is upon Reuven. Right? Why is it upon Reuven? Because he's claiming something that is out of the norm. Therefore, by definition, the burden of proof rests upon him. However, b'makom shekosvin, but I will say, if they live in a locale where they normally do write a ksuva, va'amra, and she said, lo kasavli, she claims, he never wrote for me a ksuva. In that case, aleh Allah haviraya. In that case, ultimately, the burden of proof will be upon her that halacha l'maisa, no ksuva was written. Incredible. But let's take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, l'didi mefarshili, to the olam ein kosvin shover. In reality, we don't normally write receipts. And the reason why we allow her to collect the ksuva in the first case, where she just produces a get, is why? The iba makom shein kosvin, de shein kosvin, v'hu omer kasafti, so again, it could very well be, the Gemara says, we're not talking about a shover, but rather it just depends ultimately, again, where they're living. If they live in a place where they don't normally go ahead and write a ksuva, and he claims, ultimately, I wrote a ksuva, the burden of proof is upon him. If they live in a place where they normally write a ksuva, she claims, you never wrote for me a ksuva, the burden of proof is upon her. Ve'af Rav Haderbei. And even Rav, ultimately, again, who originally established the Mishnah, is talking about a situation where, a place where they don't write a ksuva. Ultimately, he retracted his position as well. Rashi says, Haderbei, V'uki masnisin b'taima achrino, and establishes the reasoning of the Mishnah according to a different approach. Damarav, bein b'makom shekosvin, bein b'makom she'in kosvin. So Rav said, whether it's a place where they write the ksuva, a place where they don't write a ksuva, what's talacha? So this is actually very interesting. Get, if she produces a get, gova ikr. So we'll say, Rav makes a fundamental distinction over here. Rav comes along and he retracts his original position. He says like this: depending on what documentation you could produce, ultimately, again, will determine what you are able to collect. So get, if she produces a get, gova ikr. Ultimately, again, she is able to collect the ikr ksuva. Ksuva, if she produces a ksuva, gova tosefes. She's able to collect any additional tosefes ksuva. So I both say, now that makes a lot of sense, because remember again, even if you hold that ksuva is a t'nai bezdin, and therefore what? You don't have to produce a document in order to collect. At most, what does that allow you to collect? What does that allow you to collect? Ikr ksuva, right? In other words, he'll say, if Reuven and Rachel live in a place where they don't normally write a document, right? They get divorced. Rachel shows up with her get, and she says, I just want to tell you that Reuven promised me, 200 zuz as the ikr, and another 5,000 zuz as tosefes. That's very nice. That's beautiful. But there's absolutely nothing to substantiate that claim. In other words, the ability to collect without a ksuva document, because a ksuva is a t'nai bezdin, only works for the ikr ksuva amount. So therefore, Rav says that halacha l'maisa, when Rachel shows up with a get, fantastic. That allows you to go ahead and collect ikr ksuva, because ksuva is a t'nai bezdin and doesn't need its own independent document. However, if she's claiming tosefes, right, additional amounts, she's going to need to furnish a document which has those additional amounts in writing. Incredible. So I'll say, if you take a look, fine. And therefore, we'll say, just to link this back to the Mishnah, when the Mishnah says, Hotzia get ve'eni mo ksuva, gove ksuvasa, what does gove ksuvasa mean? Right? Ikr ksuva, the primary amount. So the Gemara says, ksuva, gove tosefes v'chalarotze lahashiv, yavav yashiv. So we'll say, Rav is very confident in this approach. And he says, therefore, anyone who wants to refute my position, bring it on. Right? Bring it on. Come and try to refute it. Okay. So tonight we'll say, let's analyze. Tonight we learned in the Mishnah, ksuva ve'eni mo get. So we'll say, let's say she produces, case number one, she produces a ksuva, this is case number two, excuse me. She produces a ksuva, but doesn't have a get. So what's the halacha? He omeres avad giti. So I'll say, ultimately, she claims, I lost my get. Vahu omer avad shovri. He says, I lost my receipt. V'chein balchov, just quoting the Mishnah. V'chein balchov shoti shtarcho ve'enim pruzbol. So to Reuven lent Shimon money. Reuven produces the loan document but doesn't have a pruzbol. Hare edo lo yifru. We will say in both of these cases, the husband is not obligated to go ahead and pay the ksuva, right? And the borrower is not obligated to go ahead and pay the lender. So the Gemara says, Hare edo lo yifru. So let's analyze this. Pishtam l'shmuel. So according to Shmuel, this makes sense. Mukila b'makom shein kosvin va'amar kasafti. So we'll say this must be a case where they're living in a locale, Reuben and Rachel living in a locale, where they do not normally write a ksuva. And what happens? Va'amar kasafti, he's claiming that ultimately, again, he wrote a ksuva. The amri lei, I see raya. Ultimately, again, we say to him, bring a raya. V'ilo mai si raya, amrina lei zil parei. And if he can't bring a raya, ultimately we tell him to pay. Al Rav. Nehi de ikr lo gavya tosefes miha tigbi. But according to Rav, even though this is like a reverse case. According to Rav, remember again, she's not producing a get, but she's producing a ksuva. What did Rav just say before? According to Rav, get allows you to collect what? Ikr ksuva. And ksuva allows you to collect tosefes ksuva. So this is fascinating. If she's producing a ksuva, she should at least be able to collect what? Tosefes and not ikr, which sounds so strange But again, according to Rav's reasoning, if she's producing a ksuva document, that should be the halacha. To which the Gemara says, Tosefes mi'at tigbi. Rav Yosef, what's the case? Hachamaskinon kishein sham edei gerishin. Wow. Rav Yosef, what's this case? This case where she's coming forward with a ksuva and doesn't have a get. What's the case? There are no witnesses that they're divorced. There are no witnesses that there's gerishin. So therefore, Rabbi say, now I understand. Migo diyachal lemeimar lo girashtia. Rabbi say, he has a migo. What's his migo? He could say, hey, Rachel, we're not divorced. Migo diyachal lemeimar lo girashtia amadeis yachal lemeimar girashtia v'nasati la ksuvasa. So Rabbi say, the reason ultimately, again, why Reuven doesn't have to pay a ksuva in this case is because halacha ma'aseh he has a migo. Because there are no edei gerush and there are no witnesses that they are divorced, he could just as easily say what? We're not divorced. If we're not divorced, then what does he owe her? Nothing. So because he has that migo, he's believed to say we are divorced and they already paid you your ksuva. I says the Gemara, Hamid Diktani Seifa, Rabbi Shimon Lialomer, Mina Sakana ve'elech isha gova ksuvasa, shelo beget, ubal chov shelo bepruzbal, b'di'ika edei gerush naskinon. Now, I will say, here's the problem. So now we've just set up this case, fascinating, we've just set up this case as a case where there are no edei gerushin. So remember, so again, just to point out what's happening over here. Rachel's coming to Reuven, what does she have? She has a ksuva, she doesn't have a get. She's claiming, pay my ksuva. He's claiming, I paid you. So what's the halacha? The halacha sides with him. So Gemara says, what's the case? The case is where there are no edei gerushin. There are no witnesses to divorce. And he has a migo. His migo is, he could say, I never divorced you. Now that he's saying, I divorced you, and I paid you, ultimately, again, he's believed. 1 second. No edei gerushin, that's the case. Rabbi Shimon comes along, and what does he say later on in the Mishnah? Rabbi Shimon says, by the way, from the time of sakana and on, where it was a sakana to keep any type of religious documentation, if a woman shows up, even without her get, or without her ksuva, she's believed. Now that has to be talking about a case that has to be talking about a case where there are edei gerushin. Why, Rabbi say? Listen to this. Because Rabbi say, if we're talking about a case where there's no edei gerushin, right? Then what? Rabbi say, so watch this. If the Mishnah talking about a case where there's no edei gerushin, that means there's no edei gerushin. There's also no what? No get. Potentially no ksuva. So ultimately, by my gavia, then Rabbi say, how would she ever collect? In other words, what's the credibility? Rather, you have to say that the entire Mishnah reflects the Rabbi Gamliel, and watch this, the Chisrei Mechsera V'Achi Katani. They will say, by the way, isn't it like the most exciting lines in Gemara are always Chisrei Mechsera, right? It's like you just found treasure, right? Chisrei Mechsera, by the way, there's something missing. Here it is. V'Achi Katani. Here we go. Hare Elu Lo Yifru. They will say, so again, these cases you can't collect. Which cases? Remember again, 2 cases. Case of where the wife comes along with a ksuva without a get, and the case where the lender comes along with a loan document without a pruzbal. Right? V'achi katani. So the Gemara is Hare Elu Lo Yifru. When can't the wife collect in this case? Let's focus on the ksuva case. Kishein sham edei gerushin, where there are no edei gerushin. Aval yesh sham edei gerushin, but if there are edei gerushin, then what? Gavya tosefes. Ultimately, again, she could collect tosefes. Now, I will say this is in line with Rav. Rav Shimon says hold like Rav. Namely, again, why tosefes? Because a ksuva document allows a woman to collect tosefes. So therefore, I will say what's happening over here is like this. Halach Lavai says she's coming along, right? She's claiming her full ksuva. There are edei gerushin. She's able to produce one document, a ksuva, unable to produce what? A get. Okay, you can produce a ksuva, that'll give you tosefes. The ikar, what happens with the ikar ksuva? I mafka gita gavya, the ilo mafka gita lo gavya. Ultimately, again with the get, if she could produce a get, then she could collect ikar. If she can't produce a get, then she can't produce ikar. Omina sakana ve'elech, but from sakana and on, afa gavdalo mafka gita gavya. But from sakana and on, even if she can't produce a get, she still collects ikar. Why? Omer mi sakana ve'elech isha gove ksuvasa shelo beget ubalchov shelo bepruzbal. I will say, so now this is a reframing of the Mishnah. So what's the case? So I will say, so again, case number one kind of works on its own. She's producing a get, doesn't produce a ksuva, she gets paid. That's an easy one. Why? Because you don't really need a ksuva document to begin with. It's Tanai ksuva. Case number two, she's producing a ksuva, doesn't produce a get. Now we're saying the whole thing is Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. What does Rabbi Shimon Gamliel say? Number one, there are edei gerushin. So we know that she's divorced. She's claiming, here's my ksuva, I never got paid. He's claiming, I paid you, but I didn't get my receipt. So we'll say, what's the halacha? If she produces a ksuva, she'll go ahead and she'll get tosefes. But failure to produce a get precludes her from collecting what? Iker. However, again, nishasa sakana and on, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, even failure to produce any documentation, as long as what? What do you always need? Eidei gerushin, because you have to know that she's divorced. So as long as there's eidei gerushin, failure to produce any level of documentation won't prevent her from collecting the ksuva in its entirety. Beautiful. Amar Rav Kana Ravasi, L'Rav, L'Didoch da Amrit get go ve'ikr. So I'll say, okay, so now they ask according to Rav. Rav, according to you, Rav has this interesting model. Get allows her to collect ikr ksuva. Ksuva allows her to collect tosefes ksuva. Okay, so you, according to Rav, almana min hanisuin b'may gavya. So ultimately, again, an almana, right? An almana from nisuin. Ultimately, again, how is she able to collect? Be'edei misa. Ultimately, again, she's able to collect with witnesses of death. So we'll say, as long as, in other words, we know that her husband is dead, that's how she's able to collect her ksuva. So we'll say, 1 second. Maybe we have to be concerned about as follows. Maybe right before maybe her husband divorced her, and we don't know about it. In other words, maybe there's a get. And halacha l'maisa, again, he already paid her out the ksuva, and now that he's dead, she's going to try to collect again with the ksuva that she has. To which the U.S. B'Yosheves Tachas Baila. Ultimately, she's living with her husband. Right? She was living with her husband until the time of his death. So that's why we have to assume that they were still married. They never got divorced. So therefore, again, as long as there's edei misa, witnesses that the husband is dead, will allow her to collect the ksuva. V'dilma samach l'misa girsha. Both is incredible. Maybe he divorced her right before he died. And ask yourself, why would a husband divorce his wife right before he died? Right? Why? Yibum. Right? Yibum considerations. Shabbos, listen to this. If that's the case, ihu da'afsid anafshay. I will say, if that's the case, then halacha l'maisa. And I will say, because what are we concerned about? Right? Let's say Ruvain did divorce Rachel right before Ruvain died. Let's say he did. So what's the concern? Now, no one knows about it. Right? Now, of course, not no one, because she has to get, which means witnesses are there. What's going to happen? But the Olam thinks that what's Rachel? What is she? She's an almana. So what are they going to do? They're going to pay her the ksuva. Then I will say, sometime later, what is she going to do? She's going to produce a get. And what is she going to do with that get? According to Rav, what could she do with that get? She could collect ikr ksuva again. So we'll say she could exploit the system. To which the Gemara says, you know what? You're right. If Reuben divorces her right before his death, so that no one really knows about the gerushin, ein achinami, she could exploit the system. But ihu da'afsid anafshay, he is the one who is causing his own loss. So I will say, because he's causing his own loss, therefore halacha l'maisa, we can't help. I will say, which is such a profound musar haskil. The halacha could help, right? The halacha could do many things to help. But at the end of the day, people have to help themselves as well. People have to help, right? Yeah, you have to be a gavra, you can't be a chafetza. In other words, at the end of the day, you have to help yourself. So if you compromise your own circumstances by doing things which open you up ultimately to exploitation later on, the halacha can't help you if you're not making smart decisions in life. Such an incredible yisod. So the Gemara goes weiter. Almana min ha'erisin b'may gavya. Very interesting. What about an almana from erisin? Right? So an almana from erisin, what is she collecting her ksuva based on? Now Rashi says over here, the isla ksuva, almost right across from Rashi, the isla ksuva, but tonight based in imlo kasavla. Shabbosai, we actually had this, was a whole machlokes. We actually don't paskin this way. We don't paskin this way. The Rambam paskins that there's only ksuva from nisuin. But again, the Gemara operates with an opinion that says that there is ksuva even from erisin. So what does an almana from erisin, what does she collect based on? Be'edei misa. So as long as there are witnesses that her husband died, she's entitled to collect the ksuva. I v'lechush dilma girsha umafka begita umafka gita v'gavya. Why shouldn't we be concerned that maybe he divorced her, but we didn't know? So she's going to try to collect ksuva twice. Once based on the fact that she's a widow, and the second time now later on with the get that she's a divorcee. To which the Gemara says, "Ela b'makom delo efshar kasvinan shover." I'll say it's interesting. See, this is interesting. Even though in general we have a resistance to writing receipts, and they both say the resistance to writing receipts is just then because the onus is upon the onus is upon the person who paid the debt to hold on to the receipt, right? Ultimately, again, in a case where the only way to avoid exploitation is the writing of receipt, we'll write a receipt. We'll do it. Because if you don't say this, Ede Misa Gufaihu, Nechosh Doma Mafka Ede Misa Bahai Beidina, the Gavya, Vahadar Mafka Beidina Achrina, the Gavya. They both say, even in a case where there are Ede Misa, maybe the woman is going to conspire with these Edim, and they're going to take it on the road, right? And what's going to happen? The Ede Misa are going to testify for in Beis Din A, and then they're going to go to Beis Din B, and they're going to go Beis Din to Beis Din, collecting. First, they're going to say, at a certain point in time, no legal system could protect against people who are bent on manipulating the system. But in any event, the Gemara says, "Alavade makom delo efshar kasvinan shover." Say for halacha l'maisa, in a case where we really have no choice, we'll go ahead and we'll write a receipt, if that's the only way to shield the person from exploitation. Weiter. Armali markashisha beid Rav Chisda Rashi almana mina erisin minolam de'islak suva. And I will say, this is fascinating. This is a great sugya. We'll at least start it today. Listen to this. The Gemara just took it for granted that a woman who's widowed from Erisin has a ksuva. The Gemara says, how do you know that? In other words, why do we assume that there's any level of ksuva during Erisin? Maybe ksuva itself is only a function of having entered into nisuin. I will say, first wide line, maybe it's from here, nis armala o nis garsha be'mina Erisin be'mina nisuin, go ve'es hakol. I will say, what's the case? If a woman is widowed or divorced from Erisin or from Nisuin, she collects everything. I will say, what does it mean, go ve'es hakol? Go ve'es, she collects her full ksuva. So what do we just say? It explicitly just said what? Even if she's widowed or divorced from when? From Erisin. So what do you see from here? That a woman during Erisin has ksuva. Maybe not. The Gemara says, Dilma, the cost of law. I will say, what are we asking? What we're asking is like this. We're asking, ksuva is a t'nai beis din. What does it mean when something is a t'nai beis din? What does that mean? That means that obligation devolves upon you whether you want it or not. Now I will say, so we're asking, is ksuva during Erisin a t'nai beis din? See, this case that we're talking about could be a very simple case where a husband wrote a ksuva for his, does Erisin, and writes her a ksuva. They will say, if a husband of his own volition writes a ksuva for his arusa, does that work? Absolutely. No different than what? No different than I could come over to you and say, you know what? I love you, you're great. Here's $10,000. Does that work? Sure does, right? So you should all be zocha, right? So Lemaisa, again, that's not a raya. Maybe that's a case where he just of his own volition decided to give that to her. That's not our question. We're asking from a Tanai Beis perspective, does ksuva as a Tanai Beis go into effect during Erisin? We say 1 second. If it's a case where he wrote the ksuva for her, then what are we talking about? Lafukim mit Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah. Rabbi say because this could come to exclude the position of Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, because even Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah says the Amar shelo kasav la ela amanas la konsa. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah says even in a case where a husband of his own volition writes a ksuva for his wife during Erisin, he only has in mind that ksuva should go into effect when? Once they come into nisuin. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah says, even if he's willingly writing her ksuva during Erisin, his intention is that this Erisin is going to lead to Nisuin. So this ksuva that I write during Erisin should only come into effect during Nisuin. Dekanami diktani, gova sakol. She collects everything. Iyarmet b'shlama dekasav la mishumachi gova sakol. So I'll say, if you say that this time at a case where he is willingly writing her a ksuva, that's why he says she collects everything. Amrit delo kasavla my gova esakol manama saimhu de isla. But I will say, if ultimately again we're not talking about a case where he wrote it for of his own volition, What do you mean gova es hakol? She collects everything. It's either 100 or 200 zuz. So I will say, we'll stop over for today, but again, I'm leaving off in the middle of a question, right? So I will say, so therefore we're leaving off with the fundamental question. The Gemara took it for granted that an almana from Erusin has a ksuva. What we're trying to figure out is, from where do you know that ksuva during Erusin is Tanai Bezdin? All we just showed was a case of where ultimately, again, a man could write his arusa a ksuva. He could write again, and again, the Chiddush of Rabbi Silber ben Azariah is maybe even that ksuva only kicks in during Nisuin. So of course he could voluntarily commit himself to a ksuva for an arusa. The shaila is, do we have a proof that ksuva during Erusin is Tanai Bezdin? And Miriam Hashem to be continued and resolved tomorrow. Shkoyach. All right, Chevron, everyone have an incredible day.